Welcome to Integrated. This is the podcast where we seek to bridge the gap between the intellect and the will so that we can grow as disciples of Christ, surrendering all that we are and all that we have to the truth. Hey guys, welcome back to Integrated. My name is Angela Erickson, and I'm so glad that you are here today. Thanks for joining me again 2 days in a row. This is like unheard of for me. So I really appreciate those of you who are coming back for day 2, like Caitlin. It's good to see you here. Today I'm interviewing Keith Nestor about his conversion from Protestantism to Catholicism. I'm actually not super familiar with his conversion story, but I hear it is amazing. For those of you who maybe aren't as familiar with Keith, he is the author of The Convert's Guide to Roman Catholicism, as well as Unpacking the Mysteries of the Rosary. He has his own apostolate called Down to Earth Ministry. You can definitely check that out, and I have that linked in the description for you as well. He does a lot of evangelistic work. I love following his Instagram because he always does a little tidbit on the daily gospel, which I think is extremely helpful. So anyway, for those of you also who are new to the channel, please subscribe, like, share. I always forget to ask. I'm trying to be better about that because for those of you who know on YouTube and all these other things, the more of that you get, the more this bumps up for more people to find it. So I definitely appreciate all the support that I get here. Anyway, let's get started with the interview. Let's bring Keith on. He's backstage. And thank you so much for joining me today for this episode of Integrated.
My pleasure, Angela. Thanks for inviting me.
So, okay, like I said, I'm not as familiar with your conversion story. So my understanding is you used to be a youth pastor and a pastor. How, were you raised in Protestantism? What sort of denomination? Could you fill that out for me a little bit?
Yeah. So, it all starts with how I was brought up. My father is a retired United Methodist pastor.
Oh,
So
hey, you
I
were a
grew up
PK?
in the church
Yeah.
world, of being a PK, a preacher's kid. And when I was a little kid, I went to church camp, and that's where I sort of had my, because in Protestant world, church camp's huge when you're growing up,
Yeah.
and that's where I sort of had my first come to Jesus experience as a little boy, where I remember praying that prayer to become a Christian. I was 10 or 11 years old, and that's when I really got personal with my faith. So I grew up going to church and all of those things. I never planned on being in ministry. That was sort of its own other deal. I wanted to be a musician. And so I'm a drummer, as you can see the drums back there. And I moved out to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So I live in Iowa, but I moved out to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania when I was like 19 to play drums in this band. And while I was out there, I started going to this Calvary Chapel church, which if anybody's ever seen the Jesus Revolution, that's that movement, with Greg
Wow.
Laur and all those guys.
Yes, Greg Laur. He's very fiery. He's got very fiery sermons, and he's very passionate. He's a great public speaker.
Yeah, he's great. Well, all those guys kind of came out of that movement with Chuck Smith, including the guy who was my pastor in Philadelphia. And I just fell in love with that church. I loved it. It was basically teaching the Bible verse by verse. That was for long sermons. So you'd have like a sermon that would be an hour and a half.
Wow,
Sunday
could
morning,
you imagine Catholics
Sunday,
sitting through a homily that long? They never would. They would leave.
It's funny because since I've been Catholic, like the longer the homilies are, I find myself going, all right, let's go. And usually that's after about 10 minutes because it's such a different focus. But in that environment, the focus is really solely studying the Bible. And I still love to do that. I love that kind of teaching. I love doing that. I do that on my own channel, really, to a certain degree. But anyway, one of the things that happened to me was while I was there at Calvary Chapel, I had another one of those like come to Jesus moments where I felt like the Lord was calling me to do something different with my life than play drums in this band. And then it was crazy. Like I prayed this prayer, and within a couple of days, I had basically a job offer to go be a youth pastor back in Iowa, where I'm from, a different town with a pastor who I'd known from going to church camp together. So I moved back to Iowa and became a youth pastor. I was barely 20 years old, and I really didn't have any business doing that. I didn't know what I was doing. I was I was a college dropout. I had no experience, but they just felt like I was the right guy for some reason. And I started learning how to do ministry that way. Eventually I finished school and did all that stuff. But that's how I got into doing ministry. So I spent a lot of time in youth ministry, and then there were a few other things I did in churches in different denominations. Like I became a senior pastor in an evangelical free church.
Oh.
I also worked as like a teaching pastor in an Assemblies of God church. So, but most of my career in ministry has been with, youth and preaching, worship, but also I did some stuff with missions and other things in education. So I've kind of been around a lot of different things in ministry. But the last thing I was doing before I became Catholic was I was basically functioning as like an associate pastor at a Methodist church, and I would team teach with the senior pastor. So every other week, I'm preaching in front of the whole church. Then I'm doing my youth ministry, running international missions, overseeing the worship and the education. So it was a big job in a decent sized church. So really, I have about 22 years experience in full time ministry.
Wow, that's and it's interesting to hear you describe kind of I don't know if this is the right language, but church hopping amongst different Protestant denominations. How natural was that for you? Because I know a lot of Protestants. I grew up in a very Protestant area. In fact, one of my earliest memories when we moved out there, it was very anti-Catholic, and kids on the school bus would like spit in my face and tell me I was going to hell because I was Catholic. Yes, and I remember being really put off by that, of course, but where I grew up, the mentality sort of is like anything but Catholic, anything but Catholic,
Yeah.
And so they will kind of church hop to these different denominations and whatever feels right, if they like the pastor or not. And often I find that they don't know the differences between the different denominations very well. It takes a long time for them to really cultivate an understanding that these churches have different theological leanings. And so, what was that like for you to move around? Like Methodist is pretty different from like an Assembly of God church and some of these other things. So, what was that like for you? Did you have an understanding that these were different theologically or not?
Well, it's interesting because Methodism or United Methodism, there's lots of different streams of Methodism, but
Yes, there
United
are.
Methodism has a reputation as being the denomination that doesn't believe anything. And I mean, that's kind of a way to talk about it. And the reason why it didn't start that way, but the reason why is because, I would say this is true with a lot of sort of left leaning mainline Protestant denominations. They don't really have a strong theological foundation that they cling to. So what you wind up with depends completely on who is the pastor of that particular local church and what is the DNA of that particular congregation.
Mhm.
And the Methodist churches that I worked in were very evangelical, very conservative theologically, and very much like in line with who I was as a pretty conservative, Bible believing, I would call myself in the time, evangelical Christian. So I had pretty strong theological views that didn't get in the way of what was going on in my local church. But at the denominational level, I was a fish out of water pretty much my whole entire life.
Mhm.
So for me to bounce around to like an evangelical free church, I probably felt more at home, I think, in that church than I did in the Methodist church from the standpoint of what was their theology. I really liked that church that I was a part of. The Assemblies of God was a little bit of a different animal. I was really good friends with the pastor. We were in a small town, and he basically said, "Hey, I needed a job." And he said, "We need somebody to do what you're doing. Will you just come in here and teach a Bible study service on Sunday nights?" Because it's funny, Angela, but I was senior pastor at the evangelical church and part-time associate at the AG church at the same time.
What? That's
So
wild. That is
yeah, it was weird.
wild.
I was sort of like an independent contractor, right?
That's funny.
I could bounce around. And so I learned like that I was never going to be carrying a denominational flag, which this kind of all comes into my conversion to Catholicism soon. But like, I was never really like waving the denominational flag ever in my life because I never really felt at home from that perspective, because I was just sort of brought into situations because of what I could do for their churches. And I
Oh.
sort of kept the denominational things at bay. Like I never got like officially ordained because I didn't
Hmm.
want to be like tied to that one denomination. Even though I spent 20 years as a Methodist, I was sort of like resisting that. And I didn't want to go down that road. So I was hired by these local churches to sort of do a particular contracted thing. So I learned, like, okay, when you go preach this sermon on Sunday morning to the evangelicals, it's you bring that message in a particular way. But on Sunday night, when you go and bring that same message to the AG church, you're going to wrap that in a little bit of different style. And, the worship experience, which I also led worship too, that was going to be a little more charismatic, right? So,
yeah.
So Sunday morning, it's hey, all right, shout to the Lord, and then Sunday night, it's all right, let's go.
We got fog machines and lasers.
Oh,
and
yeah,
coffee.
We had all that stuff.
Yeah.
And when I was a youth pastor, we had all that. I had pyrotechnics. I had
no way.
Oh yeah,
that is wild.
We had a wild youth group, man. Our youth group. So we started this little youth group with about 12 kids in this little neighborhood church in Davenport, Iowa, and within a couple years, there were 250, 300 kids coming to that youth group every Wednesday night.
Wow.
And it was awesome. Like, it blew up and it radically changed our city. I mean, it was crazy. And it's funny because really all of that is what walking through that sort of, I don't know, over the top kind of ministry is what eventually opened the door for me to learn about Catholicism, because it was through that where I met, I know Devin Schott, but because I know he interviewed you, or you interviewed him, but that's where I met Devin. So I met Devin because I was looking for a logo. I needed a graphic designer and that's what Devin, he's a graphic designer, and that's what he used to do before he started doing ministry full time.
Yeah.
And I just called him on the phone through the Yellow Pages, and we talked back and forth, and he agreed to create a logo for my youth ministry. This is like back in 1997.
Wow.
You probably weren't even born yet. And
I was born. I'm 92, baby. Yeah.
Oh, really? That's when I graduated high school.
That's funny.
That's hilarious. So I met Devin, right?
Yeah. And he's such a good guy.
Oh man.
Just a good human.
He's a great guy. And I remember when I met him, I'd never met anybody who knew who knew their Catholic faith. The only interaction I had with Catholics were, oh no, you got Rob on here.
Rob
all right. What's up, Rob? As long as
everyone's
Anthony,
like,
we're in good shape.
Him on Avoiding Babylon. We saw him on Avoiding Babylon. Yeah.
So I shout out to those guys. But so the only Catholic person I knew, oh hey, how you doing?
Oh, there's Veronica. She has to make her appearance every show. It's family friendly.
Yeah.
So yeah, you met Devin.
Yeah, but before that, so really the only person I really knew who had any kind of real connection to Catholicism was my wife. And when I met her, I wanted to date her. And I said to her, hey, do you go to church? And she said, well, not really. And I'm like, well, are you a Christian? She's like, well, I'm Catholic. Does that count? And I said, no. Oh. And so, because typical Protestantism, right? You don't, the only thing you know about Catholicism is what you've heard from other Protestants.
Oh, 100%. I've had that experience with family members. Yeah. One of them asked me, who saves you? And my husband's a convert. And we looked at each other. We thought she was kidding,
Right.
And then I said, well, do you want to answer this one or should I? And we both looked at her and said, Jesus. And I thought, we say the Jesus prayer. That means we're all saved, right? Like, Catholics believe Jesus saved us. Why aren't we saved? Why are you trying to save us right now? I don't get it. Yeah.
That's exactly where I was coming from. And I invited her to come to Calvary Chapel with me, and she came with me. Because even though she grew up going to Catholic school and everything, her parents never took her to mass. She didn't really have like a faith. She just, like when you live in some of these bigger cities on the East Coast in particular, a lot of people, they identify as Catholic, but it's more of a cultural thing than it is a personal relationship faith thing.
100%. Yes. Yeah.
So what that will end up looking like, especially if you're in a big city where she was, you send your kids to Catholic school because you're not going to dare send them to the public school. And you technically view yourself as Catholic. So that's what you do. So that's what she did. And when I met her, she was very interested in Christianity, but her upbringing in Catholicism wasn't very helpful. So it was very easy to get her to make the switch. And then when we got into the church world, our church started to grow. And most of the people that were coming in were people who were Catholics that didn't know their faith, and they thought our church was cool, and it was more fun, and they liked it a lot better, So I was very comfortable with the idea of converting someone who's Catholic to become Protestant. So when I met Devin, I thought that's exactly what's going to happen here, because it was clear to me he had a pretty strong faith in Jesus, because he was talking about Jesus a lot. Well, I went to his house, I walked in, and I recognized, okay, there's something different about this guy, because there's Catholic stuff everywhere.
I know.
And yeah, I mean,
everywhere. It's everywhere.
That's how his house is. I mean, it looks like you're walking into, the Sistine Chapel or something. So I was sort of like looking at this going, okay, are you Catholic? And he's like, yeah. So then I start with, my line of questioning. Well, when were you saved? Kind of like your friend asked you, your family member asked you, and your husband, who saves you? All this. And Devin was the first person that ever had an answer as a Catholic to things that I was talking about, personal relationship, salvation with Jesus Christ, all these things, right? Or personal relationship with Jesus Christ. And that led to this friendship that began to grow. It was sort of a contentious friendship, because he was trying to convert me to become Catholic, and I was trying to convert him to become Protestant. And we were both in our early 20s at the time, newly married. So we had a lot of fire. We had a lot of machismo. We were both pretty arrogant. We both thought we knew everything about everything. So, and we were both kind of fiery guys. So you put that combination together, and it was interesting.
I would imagine at times explosive. Yeah.
It was. We had a couple of moments where, I thought we're gonna fight here. I mean, it was because you start off talking about theology, but then kind of as it ramps up, it can get into personal things, and it can become, and we went there. We went there, but we had this level of respect for each other that sort of got us through that. And the truth is, a lot of the things he was saying to me, I'd never heard before. And I was like kind of blown away. So at the time that I met him, I was going to seminary. And so I would take some of the things that he would say to me and bring them to my seminary professors and say, all right, how do I rebut this? How do I answer these questions? Or what's the kryptonite to Catholicism here? And they didn't have very good answers, Angela. So I was starting to get a little freaked out about that. But at the same time, I was also starting to like really become attracted to it at the same time. So I had this weird thing going on where on one hand, I'm like, wow, that's really cool what the Catholic Church, goes all the way back to Jesus and has this understanding of a deposit of faith and an apostolic succession. But come on, it can't be right. So I would have
what is the disconnect there for Protestants? Can you explain that to me? I mean, I'm thinking, a lot of Protestantism, there is this universalist mindset, except for Catholics. There's that exclusion there, like we're talking about, which I find really interesting. But then on the other hand, they do sort of deny tradition in this way, and this historical backing of the Catholic Church. They sort of act as if it's unimportant, that they should be able to read the Bible without anything else. No historical backing, nothing. You should just be able to read the Bible, nothing else to understand your faith, and that should be sufficient for you. And so they sort of shirk away from what things that have been taught for millennia. Can you explain that for me? That's just something I really don't understand, why that wouldn't appeal to somebody having those foundations.
Well, one thing you have to sort of say as a disclaimer is you can't lump all Protestants together.
Sure.
So there are some Protestants that are very connected to the idea of church tradition and church teaching and things like that. Typical,
Lutherans.
Like what people will say is like classical Protestantism. Okay. Which I've had people that challenge me now and talk about, well, that's classical Protestant. And I ask them, can you please define classical Protestantism to me in an authoritative way? And they can never do it. They just have their own view of it. But by and large, what it boils down to is this: the narrative that the scriptures alone are the source of infallible truth to our faith So anything that in their minds contradicts the scriptures is going to be thrown out. And when you also throw in this built-in distrust of tradition, because they'll look at things that Jesus says, talking about you have nullified the word of God for your traditions of men. They just to Catholics, tradition is beautiful. To a lot of Protestants, tradition is a bad word, because they look at that and they immediately think of the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and they think, okay, we don't want man-made traditions. We just want the unadulterated word of God. So that's where that comes from. Now we can talk about why that doesn't work.
Well, I mean, just, even in a daily living and family life, you have traditions, right?
But they are always afraid of anything that in any way rivals the authority of Scripture alone.
For sure. Mm-hmm.
So they might say, well, it's okay to have traditions about this, about that, whatever, but the Bible alone is our sole source of infallible faith. Now, that is going to take you in different directions depending on who's doing the interpreting and who's doing the teaching. And that's, of course, why we have so many different Protestant denominations, because we all know that reading the Bible alone leads to division, because people are going to interpret it differently. And that's what we have. But that's where the whole, and the whole anything but Catholic thing comes in, because the Catholic Church is going to say things that just sound really, really scary to Protestants. And in particular with authority, that the Pope is infallible. Whoa, that can't be right. That Mary did never sin. Well, that can't be right.
Like, there's all these so interesting, because they think their pastor is infallible.
Well, no, they don't. They don't think their pastor. No Protestant is going to think their pastor's infallible.
Oh, interesting.
And no pastor is going to think he's infallible. But the first problem is we have to define infallibility.
Sure.
Now, most Catholics that have any understanding of their faith recognize that the doctrine of papal infallibility does not mean that the Pope is perfect. It's a negative gift, actually, that he's protected from teaching error under very narrow, specific circumstances. Okay. Mm-hmm. Most Protestants don't get that nuance. They just go, oh, you believe the Pope is perfect, therefore.
Yeah, they believe he's impeccable.
Exactly. Therefore, we saw him, he said something stupid, therefore Catholicism is false. Protestants, they don't operate like that. They think that the Bible alone is infallible, and that human beings can teach it, but nobody really knows for sure what the full faith teaches. And no one can make that claim to say, yes, I have it perfect. Now, some operate as though they do, right? Some will operate in that place where they pretend that their interpretations, but if you really press them and you say, are you telling me that you've never changed your mind on a theological truth? Or how do you know that what you're teaching is true? A lot of them are going to say, well, the Holy Spirit revealed it to me, but at the same time, I can't pretend to know that everything I say is 100% true.
Interesting. And that to me would be such a turnoff, maybe because I am Catholic. I'm like, I want certitude here, because there is a big T truth. There is an absolute truth. And so why should I be inclined to listen to somebody who isn't even certain that they have the big T truth?
Well, there's different ways people deal with that, Angela. One of the ways is they divide up that big T truth into these imaginary categories called essentials and non-essentials. So what you might hear when you talk to different Protestants about the disagreements between Protestant denominations is you'll hear them say things like, well, we're going to have unity in the essentials, but we're going to have, some gray area in the non-essentials, but we're going to also have, respect for each other.
Right.
So where it gets really tough, though, is defining what those essentials are. And different denominational groups will go to different places for that. So, for example, you will have some Protestant denominations that have a different view of baptism than others. So even within their denomination, so I talked about being evangelical free for a little while. Within that particular denomination, there are some that believe in infant baptism, and there are some that believe in believers' baptism only within the same denomination. Okay. So I remember when I was when I took the job at that church, at the time, I didn't believe in infant baptism. And I asked one of the guys from the denomination, I said, well, what am I supposed to do if somebody wants me to baptize their baby? I don't believe in that. He said, well, you don't have to do that, but we just have to bring a different pastor in who will do that. You know? So I had to be okay with a different pastor coming in to do that, but feeling like it was okay that I didn't do it. Now, to me, that's just insanity. But you can have that issue. So what's essential?
Yeah.
That's the tough part, is even areas related to salvation, right?
I was just gonna say that, because
you have guys that believe that God predestines people to heaven or hell. You have the Reformed Calvinist tradition, and then you have the Armenian tradition, both within Protestantism. Some believe one way or the other, but they're going to say, well, that's not essential. But then you will have some like super hardcore fundamentalists that will say King James only, or you're not even a Christian. So it's all over the map, Angela. But you just kind of have to find your tribe and go with it. But the reason why a lot of people church hop is because they might hear their pastor say something that they disagree with, or they hear another pastor say something. They go, yeah, I like what he said. And then we have to leave churches and change denominations now because now we're on a different track. That kind of thing happens all the time because people don't have that authority to say, well, this is what the truth is.
That's so interesting. So then let's fast forward here a little bit.
Sure.
You're starting to be drawn towards Catholicism. What like how much of a barrier and obstacle did Our Lady pose to you entering into the church? What, any at all?
Well, yeah, I would say at first that, the doctrines of the Blessed Virgin Mary were just like any other doctrine at first to me that I felt like the Catholic Church was wrong in. But it was weird. Like I was feeling drawn towards her and I didn't even really know it sometimes. Like, what's interesting. I've never talked about this publicly, but I remembered this a few weeks ago, and I've done, tons of interviews and never talked about this. But when I was finishing up my bachelor's degree in my religion course, my final paper that I wrote as a evangelical Protestant was I wrote about the Catholic doctrines around the Blessed Virgin Mary and where they came from. And I went through all of that as a Protestant. For some reason, I was interested in that. But what happened was, so Devin invited me with some other people to go on a pilgrimage to Medjugorje and to Rome, like 2 years after we met. And because it was a free trip, because somebody was going to bring me on this trip for free, and we were going to go to Italy, I thought, well, I'll go. I didn't know anything about Marian apparitions or Medjugorje or whatever like that, but I decided to go. So I was very, of course I was outnumbered. I was the only Protestant probably around. But on that trip, I saw how these Catholics worship Jesus through Mary. And it was like something I'd never seen before. And I found myself really intrigued by it. I wasn't sure that I bought into it at the time, but there was something about it that hit me on like a different level than an intellectual level. There was an emotional pull there. But when I came back from that trip, I don't know, there were some walls that had come down in my heart towards the Catholic Church, because I'd really seen Catholics practicing their faith in a beautiful way. And, of course, went to Rome. So I was seeing things related to just the scope of the church and how incredible it was. And I had a moment where I thought I was going to become Catholic, but I kind of chickened out. But Our Lady actually, when I look back on the whole experience, which lasted a long time, I feel like she was guiding me. I never felt like this, oh, you guys are worshiping Satan and the Blessed Virgin Mary is, whatever. I mean, I had my Protestant hangups as usual, but that wasn't one that was like a real big sticking point for me. And here's why. Because, and a lot of Protestants don't agree with me, but I saw a lot of what the Catholic Church taught about Mary in the Bible pretty explicitly. Not necessarily her assumption, right? But I saw the whole Mother of God. I saw the Ark of the Covenant. The new Ark of the Covenant. I saw all the typology, and I love stuff like that. I recognize that, and it just kind of blew me away.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I feel like even as a Catholic, sometimes I've had a hard time relating to Our Lady. It's taken me a very long time to come to a place where I um, feel like I'm starting to know her. And then for me, anyway, it was my motherhood. That was
Oh
how
yeah.
I started to connect with Our Lady, was through her motherhood. And I've talked about this before too on the show. This phenomenon of microchimerism, where the mother and the baby exchange stem cells. And so you think about how incredible it is that God preordained this. He created us in this manner, and he chose to be born from Our Lady. And you know that Jesus Christ himself was sharing cells with Our Lady, and that those cells resided in her for her entire life. And you're like, wow, what an incredible gift. And I even saw on the feast of Our Lady of Sorrows, somebody posited or sort of asserted that perhaps one of the reasons God designed women and children in this dyad this way is so that when Our Lady was enduring her sorrows, watching our Lord be tortured and crucified, that his cells would be at the same time healing her heart. And that's
Wow.
how she endured it. I know, doesn't it give you goosebumps just thinking about that? You're like, wow, God is so good. And so I just think about that and I'm like, wow, Our Lady is so amazing. And I wish everyone could know more about her and how she leads us to Christ. So for you, like, are there any specific ways that she has led you to Christ and closer to him?
Oh, absolutely. Well, she led me into the Catholic Church ultimately because
Mhm.
I was, years after all of that stuff, and I was having a lot of trouble in my denomination because I was seeing it spiral out of control, and I was like, I can't do this anymore. I've gotta figure this out. And enough things had been brought into my mind that were related to Catholicism that when I was encountering the problems, that's just where I seemed to go. And was thinking about, well, what about the Catholic Church? What about the Catholic Church? And as I was beginning to open my heart to it, anew, when I was working on a particular sermon, I remember one time I was writing a sermon series in Advent about what happened when people found out about the events of Advent, right? So who gets the
Mhm.
news was what this sermon series was called. And I was writing the sermon about the Annunciation and Luke chapter 1. And while I was in my office writing this sermon, I just began to weep as
Mm.
I would read anything about her and as I would look at the scriptures concerning her. And I had never had anything like that happen to me before. And I'm pretty sure I had taught through that passage plenty of times in the past, but there was something that was happening in my heart where I like felt her presence there with me, and I like writing this sermon with me. It was almost like she was telling me what to say.
Mm.
So I'm in a, I'm preaching this sermon. I got up and preached that sermon, and I talked about how she's the new Ark of the Covenant. She's the new Eve. She's the woman of Genesis 3:15, of Revelation 12. I went all these places. I was quoting the church fathers, talking about her, full of grace. All these. I preached that sermon in my Protestant church,
Wow.
and people were blown away, and it was crazy. And I remember relating that to one of my Catholic friends. I had a couple of really good Catholic friends, Devin and another guy named Greg, and he came to see me one day, and and he kind of knew I was struggling and thinking about Catholicism again. And I told him, I said, I'm just like, something's going on with the Virgin Mary. And he just started crying too. He's the one that took me to Medjugorje with Devin.
Hmm.
And, so from there, it was like one little step after the next towards that. But I always felt like I had all these objections to different doctrines, all the things that you go through as a convert, and they were being knocked down one by one. But there's a deeper level of objection that you have to get through to come into the Catholic faith, especially when you're, a Protestant pastor or ministry, whatever, full time. You've got to have a conversion of your heart too. It's not just your
Mhm.
head. And I think you can study your way into the Catholic Church, but never really get it in terms of your personal faith, because it can just become a bunch of facts to you. And I think we
Mhm.
see that sometimes with Catholics who their faith is all about facts and objects, but they don't have a personal love with Jesus or a love with Our
Mhm.
Lady. And I think that that's what she helped bridge the gap for me, was this relationship between the facts that I was learning about the Catholic faith and the relational aspect from a spiritual perspective. She just
Yeah.
drew me in.
I love that because, as women, we're supposed to be the heart of a family, and that is such a maternal thing, just her drawing that love out in
Yeah.
you and showing you that. I really love that, and I see her doing that in my own life, but I've always wondered, what's it like for a man to relate to Our Lady? Because I do it through my motherhood, and you perhaps do it through being mothered.
It's really interesting because I really relate to that right around the time that all this was happening. The same time my mother, who I love dearly, was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer
Mm,
and was actively dying, and so I was losing my mom
mm,
during this entire time, that I felt like the Blessed Mother came alongside me and said, "Okay, we're gonna relate to you this way." So it was weird. Like in one sense, I'm losing the only mother that I've ever known in my mom, right? Who I love dearly. But now I feel like this other type of maternity coming into my life on a spiritual perspective. So it was this just really interesting dynamic, and it was really comforting to me at the same time all this was going on, that I was feeling drawn into the Catholic faith in many ways because of her.
wow. Wow, that's incredible. And praise be to God. Like, he's so good. I think I look back to on so many times in my life when I could see that in my suffering, he was drawing me in, and often he was preparing me for something else.
Yeah.
And so, I'm sure you can relate to that as well. What was it like for you when you did convert and you finally jumped into the church, you became Catholic? What was that like even with your wife?
Oh man. Well, for me, it was amazing. I was so excited. I was terrified because I quit my job. I didn't know what was going to happen. I had to let go of my identity and career and ministry. And, I lost a lot to make that decision. But what I realized was, it was what I thought was going to be the thing that I could never live without, became the thing that I offered as a sacrifice to the Lord, and he was filling me with so much peace and so much joy. I loved it. My wife, on the other hand, when I told her that I needed to become Catholic, her response was, "Keith, I'm so proud of you. I want to support you, and I trust you. I've seen you wrestle with this for so many years, and I believe that you're doing what you believe God's calling you to do. And as a wife, I am proud of you and support that." For her, though, personally, she wasn't necessarily feeling that. My wife is not the kind of person that's like, "All right, I'm going to investigate the claims of Catholicism and read a bunch of books and watch a
Mhm.
bunch of YouTube videos." Like, she doesn't operate that way. So she was sort of looking at things from a mother's perspective. Well, how's this going to affect our home? We
Mm,
have 3
yeah.
kids. What are we going to do? How are we going to survive? And what about our family? How does this affect our family? My wife very much is the heart of our family. And so she had all of these practical things that she was wrestling through, but she said, "I want to be with you and support you." So she came in with me. Now, because she was raised Catholic, her process was a lot different than mine.
Right.
She went to we got married, so we had to get in the Catholic Church because we didn't originally get married in the Catholic Church. So we did that. She went to confession, which was a hard thing for her because she had a really bad experience with confession when she was a little girl, and she said she'd
Mm,
never go back.
that's
So,
sad.
it was. So she came in with me, but struggled hard. Every Sunday we'd go to mass. I would be like, "Wow, this is amazing. Did you see what just happened? This was incredible." Trying to like experience all of it because I'm finally here, right? And she would just
Mhm.
bawl. She would just sit in
Oh,
church and cry and cry and cry because her whole life just got yanked out from under her. And she saw this happening to me, but she wasn't relating to it. And
right.
then, on top of it, we had 3 teenage kids that didn't get it at all. And they were like, "Do we have to do this? We don't like this. We
Hmm.
go back to our church.
That's tough.
This is boring. What in the world? Why are there so many screaming babies in here? Don't they have a nursery? Why does the
Yeah.
band stink? Why does the priest dress like a Jedi? Why, what's the deal with this? Why does he talk that way? Like like all of the things of Catholicism that Catholics just go, well, that's just how it is. When you're a Protestant and you come into that, you don't understand any of it.
Right.
And I understood it because I had done all this research and learning, and it's because of this and the liturgy's this way. But when you're raised outside of that, it just seems like the most strange thing to you. And so we had a lot of turmoil in our life because of that.
What was the turning point for your wife? Was there, I mean, I'm assuming there was a turning point at some time. How long did that take?
Well, I would say after a few months, she kind of got to a point where God was saying to her, and she was ready to listen. Hey, are you just going to complain the whole time? Or are you actually going to open up your eyes and listen, and open up your ears and listen, open up your eyes and see? Maybe there's something here that you need to pay attention to. And I remember, it's crazy because I remember my wife had that realization one day. We went to one of our best friends who he was our senior pastor. He's running a local church here in town that he started. Okay. So Protestant church. And we went there for a little while to help him. I led a little bit of worship for him because he was in between worship leaders. Like, can you just help me out here? I know you're Catholic now, but can you just come and do this? So we'd go to mass. Then I'd go and do a little worship at this church on a temporary basis just to get him through. And then so we would go to mass, go to do that. Well, one of the Sundays, she was praying in his church, and she felt like God was saying, you need to open your eyes to the beauty of the Catholic Church. Because what was happening was this: the more we were going to mass, the less she was even enjoying Protestant worship, which is crazy.
Oh, that's super interesting.
It's very interesting because, that's where our best friends were. That's where we came from. This is like, we know all these people. They're our friends. That are like our family. And this is kind of what you think she'd be more like, yeah, this is what I really miss. But the opposite thing was happening, right? We would go to this worship service, and then we'd go to mass. And then she'd be like, yeah, here's where the mass is better. Here's where this. And I was just like paying attention to this going, this is how I was feeling. I'm like, it was uncomfortable for me. But anyway, there was this one particular morning where because of time reasons, we didn't get to go to mass in the morning. So we went that night, and she had felt the Lord just speaking to her saying, you need to open your eyes. And we were at mass. It was like 5:30 p.m. mass. And the opening hymn was "Open My Eyes. I want to see, help me to see your face," or whatever. I don't know what it was. And open our eyes, Lord,
Lord, yep.
And when that happened, she grabbed me, and she was like, and she just had tears streaming down her face.
Oh.
And after that, she was like, she told me that how the Lord just said that to her. And she was like, that was incredible. Well, the ultimate turning point for her happened when a year has gone by. We get invited to go back to Medjugorje with a friend of ours, the same friend who took us the first time. His name's Greg. And we went over there with him. And my wife went with me. My 1 year anniversary of being a Catholic was our first day over there.
Wow.
And which I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. Well, she was still struggling, right? But it was getting better. She felt like the Lord on the last night was telling her, you need to go to confession, which she did not want to do. She hated confession. But God was just beating her down. Go to confession, go to confession. And she was just like, nope, 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 nope. Well, the last night we're there, she finally, at like 9:45 at night, she's like, all right, maybe I should try to go to confession. And confession in Medjugorje is like crazy. There's like dozens of priests in this courtyard. People are lined up for hours. I mean, it's an incredible experience. Well, she said to our friend, do you think that there's any chance I can get into confession, tonight? And he said, highly unlikely. It's done in 15 minutes. Chances of finding an English-speaking priest over there are pretty low, but she's like, well, I want to try. So we walked over, and as luck would have it, there was, Providence would have it, there's one priest with an English flag sitting next to his chair. It's all outdoors. And he's sitting there. And she walked up to him, and I was kind of like hanging back, obviously. And he said to her, I've been waiting for you.
Wow. I just got goosebumps. Wow.
And she was like, okay. And I'm watching this happen, and it's going on for like 20, 25 minutes. And I can tell that she's really like pouring her heart to this guy, and he is, reacting to this. Well, when she finally gets done, she gives him this big hug, and she comes back to me, and she's got tears streaming down her face. And I said, well, what do you need to do for your penance? She says, nothing. And I said, he didn't give you a penance? I know you sinned. And she's like,
I
no,
know
no.
you.
Yeah. I'm like, come on. And basically what happened was, was one of those experiences where he read her soul. And she went through her little sins, and he said, okay, that's fine. But let me tell you the real reason why you're here.
Wow.
This is your last night. You've been putting this off. You came on this trip. You've been feeling lost. You've been feeling stuck. And I just want to, and so, he basically went through this whole thing with her. And that experience was like, boom, a light switch went on in her life. And she's never been the same since, and now she's on fire for the faith. She's still not like I'm going to read all these books and do all these things, but she loves the faith. And it was that moment there where everything kind of just, boom, the whole script in our life flipped. It was that exact moment. It was crazy.
Wow. What about your kids? I mean, they were so much older when you converted. So, I mean, are they practicing Catholics now? Do they get it, or are they still sort of holding things off at a distance?
Oh, yeah. No, they are not. They are not practicing Catholics at all. So they were like 15, 17, and 18 at the time. And this is about 6 years ago. So my kids are all moved out of the house. They're grown up. My daughter's married, and she's a worship leader in a Protestant church. My two sons are, they don't even really go to church that often anymore. They would tell you that they believe in God, and they have that. My youngest son has gone to mass a few times at the cathedral in the town that he lives in, just because I bug him to do it. But they at first they were very like, we don't understand this. Why did you do this? What is going on? They were like, well, we'll try it. But then when they realized they didn't like it, then they just sort of swung the other way. And over the years, though, it's kind of swung back, not to where they're like, hey, we want to be Catholic, but they are, like, they'll come to mass with us for holidays or whatever. We go visit our son who doesn't live in our town. He'll go to mass. So, there's a cathedral there that I love to go to. So if I ask him, hey, will you come with? Yeah, sure, I'll go. I mean, I would say they're more open to it now, but they haven't like decided to go on that part of their journey. What I have to remind myself is, there were many years between when I was exposed to Catholicism and when I actually like owned that for myself. So I pray for them every day. They know that. Sometimes it bothers them that I do that because they don't get it all the time. But
right.
The thing that's been cool, though, has been to see them become more open to having conversations about it. So we can talk about it. There was a while where we couldn't talk about it because they felt like I was pushing it on them too much. And they're like, we don't want to hear any more of this Catholic stuff, right? Well, now it's like when it comes, and I try to be selective in when I bring it up so it doesn't get too overwhelming, but they're supportive of what I do. They'll watch my videos. My sons share my videos with their friends. I've got some of their friends that are coming into the church.
No way. That's
because they've shared the videos with them, right?
Yeah.
So it's God's got a plan.
He does.
I've given them to the Blessed Mother, and I'm, I pray for them every day. They know that I'm praying for them, but at this moment, they haven't done that.
Yeah, I was going to say, I bet you are entrusting them a lot to Our Lady, and praying that she sort of leads them the same way that she led you. So what was the genesis then of you starting this apostolate, down to earth ministries, things like that, and writing your books? I mean, you have at least two books out.
I have 2 books. Yeah. Well, I have to tell you, the thing is, I never saw myself doing this. I didn't think that I would ever do anything like this. I didn't try to do this. I didn't have a goal to do this. When I left ministry, that was like that was the hardest part for me to give up. And I truly did it. I truly gave that to the Lord and said, I am done with this. And I was fine. And my priest said to me, Keith, people are going to try to get you to do stuff because thank you so much, Sally, for praying for my kids. People are going to try to get you to do stuff. He said, don't do anything for a year. Just be Catholic, And I was cool with that People would ask me, do you miss being a pastor? Do you miss preaching? Answer, no. I gave that up. I just love being Catholic so much. I didn't need to do that. So, and I need to say that because there are a lot of people who they're already like starting podcasts before they've become Catholic on why they're Catholic, which I'm not here to say what anybody should or shouldn't do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I'm saying that for a lot of people, because I talk to a lot of these people. A lot of people, that's just their first thing that they want to do is figure out how they can use their gifts for ministry as a Catholic, which is fine. That wasn't the road I wanted to go down. I didn't want that pressure. I wanted to just not have any strings attached, any of that. I need to say that because the way that this happened was pretty miraculous. So the night after my wife's confession that I told you, one of the things that the priest confessed to her, or that she confessed to him, was, or said to him, I don't know if you're supposed to reveal confession things, probably not, but she had talked about how she felt like we were in no man's land. She knew I was supposed to be doing things for ministry, but she was frustrated because doors hadn't been opened, nothing was happening. And the reality is, I had been given invitations. I'd done a couple of little talks like for Greg's church. I'd gone and done it, but I always said no. And I wasn't trying to do that. And that frustrated her because she thought that I should be putting forth that effort to do that. People had said, oh, you should write a book like Scott Hahn. And I'm like, nope, I will never write a book. That's not me. I'm not going to do that. Well, the priest told her, just be patient. Just keep doing what you're doing. And, God's got a plan here. Well, the very next day, we're driving on the bus back to Split, Croatia, because we're about to fly home. And as we were driving on the bus at like 5:25, we all stopped to pray the rosary. And as we were praying, I felt this thing just hit me. And I just instantly had my first book. I pulled my phone out and I started typing into the notes section on my phone. And Stella's looking at me like, what are you doing? We're praying. I'm like, this is the book I have to write. And I still have that note in my phone, The Convert's Guide to Catholicism, and that became the title of my book, The Convert's Guide to Roman Catholicism, Your First Year in the Church. I got off that bus and I knew exactly what I had to do. I'm like, I have to write this book about what it's like to be a new convert in the church. Not an apologetics book, not a book on why you should become Catholic, not my own personal conversion story either. I didn't feel like we needed that. We've already got all those books.
Yep.
But this is different. Now, some of the elements of my story are woven into it, but this is a book written to people who have already decided to become Catholic, but need to be walked through that first year because there's a lot of things that are different in the Catholic Church that converts, even though you learn the information in RCIA or whatever, you will never learn what it's like to be a convert until you do it. So, for example, how do you tell your family and friends that you're Catholic? I have a chapter called How to Not Start a Holy War, coming out as a Catholic. What do you do? What not to do, right? How do you look for a local church when you're a Catholic? It's totally different than when you're a Protestant. When you're a Protestant, you church hop with a completely different set of things that you're looking for than when you do as a Catholic. How do you navigate through your first year in terms of which devotions you should take part in? Because everybody's going to come up to you with their favorite thing, and you're going to be given 9 million trinkets and books and booklets and rosaries and
holy cards,
and cards. Like, are you supposed to do all of those things? Like, there are a lot of these issues, the cultural things that you deal with as a Catholic that are just different. And I wanted to make a book where I was basically saying to you, as if we were sitting down having a cup of coffee, all right, here's what it's like in your first year. Here's what you need to know. Here's what you need to do. And here's what you need to recognize you're going to feel. So that happened after that first year, I started working on that book. And, I self-published it. I just put it on Amazon. I had it professionally edited and all that stuff like that. Devin did the cover for me. And through that, I started, after the year was up, I started getting invitations to speak. And I started saying yes, because the year was up and I started in my own church, the first big one. And someone sent me a video of it and I just parked it on a YouTube channel. I made a YouTube channel just to put the video on there. And I didn't even think anything of it. And I had another video on there from something I did at a church in Devinstown. And out of nowhere, all of a sudden, these videos just start getting all these views. And my wife and I were looking at this. We're like, this is bizarre. Like, whoa, this video's got 2,000 views and then like 3,000. And I remember when it hit 7,000, Estelle like made a post about it on Facebook. She's like, can you guys believe how many views this video has on Facebook or on YouTube? And so what happened was, and that grew and grew and grew. So then we thought, well, maybe we should make more videos. So we would go to mass and then come home on Sundays and we just go, hey, what should we talk about? Or what should I talk about? And we'd get the camera out and I just like, okay, today I'm going to make a video about 3 things about the Blessed Virgin Mary that you need to know. So all those early videos on my YouTube channel that you see, those were not scripted. Those were not planned. I just was like, it's Sunday. Let's make a video. I'm still working full-time jobs. I'm still running a business. I'm still doing all these things. But yet Sunday afternoons would be, I'd take a couple hours, make a YouTube video, throw it up there. And that's kind of how I got started in the YouTube world. And from there, different opportunities started coming to me. Different doors began to be open. And then over the course of the next couple of years, I transitioned out of those jobs into doing this ministry.
Wow, that's amazing. Well, I know there are so many Catholics who hopefully will listen to this one, but have listened to you and your work and have benefited a lot from the amazing
thank you so much. I
evangelistic stuff
appreciate
that
that.
you do. No, I mean, we need more of it. We need more positivity and edification right now, I think, in the church, things that are going to be more unifying than dividing. And so that's something that I really love about your work is it's edifying and not sowing more division in the church right now. So I just want to thank you for that. We need more Keith Nesters right now in the church.
Oh, well, I appreciate that. I try to be, but the biggest thing that I want to be with my content is there's 2 words that always come to mind. I want to be inspirational to people and I want to be helpful.
Mm-hmm.
That's the most important thing to me. I don't care if I'm entertaining. I don't care if I have a ton of views. I don't care if I become, Catholic famous or whatever, or rich or whatever. I don't care about any of that stuff. I care about, is this content helping people grow in their faith? And is it inspiring other people to a greater level of discipleship from wherever they're starting?
Mm-hmm.
If they're Protestants or if they're like a cradle Catholic who's just been sort of lukewarm in their faith, I want to inspire them to go deeper with that and to take that more seriously. So, most of what I do on YouTube revolves around 2 things that will never make you YouTube famous or get you a huge channel. It's praying the rosary every day and studying the week's readings. I mean, that's the bread and butter. But it's not glamorous. It's not in any way controversial to make everyone go, oh, I got to see what this is all about.
Right.
But hopefully it's helpful.
Well, yeah, we need more of that. So everybody, where can they find you? What if they aren't familiar with your work? Where's the best place for people to connect with you and get plugged in?
So my website's just down2earthministry.org, and it's down the number 2earthministry.org. But on YouTube, I have 2 YouTube channels. Just Keith Nestor is my original YouTube channel. And then I have a YouTube channel called Rosary Crew with Keith Nestor.
Ooh,
and the
I'll add
Rosary
that.
Crew is where we pray our daily rosary. And I have other things on there related to prayer, sort of like the devotional arm of things. And we've been doing a daily live stream on there for almost 4 years, every single day.
Wow. So there's a lot on there.
Yeah, it's really cool. We have an incredible community of prayer. If anybody wants to pray the rosary with us, I mean, the people that are on this channel are amazing. And then, my regular YouTube channel, that's where I do it's called Unpacking the Mass. That's the Bible study I do every week through the readings. So I'm going to walk through the readings for the upcoming week's Mass. So that way, when you go to Mass, you've already been thinking about them. I find that whenever I go to Mass, if I haven't even looked at the readings, sometimes the priest's going to touch on them more than others.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that's so important to learn what is being taught to us in the reading. So I want to help prepare us for that so that when the priest is ready to walk you through the readings, you've already been thinking about it. You've already been interacting with it. You've already been convicted by it or challenged by it. So then when your priest comes to you with that homily, you already are in that, you're primed and ready to go. So that's what that's about.
Yeah, can I ask you, do you follow a one calendar over another? Do you use the traditional calendar, like
Well,
1962 calendar, or
it's
do you use
funny.
a new liturgical calendar?
Well, so for unpacking the mass, I use the UCCB Novus Ordo coming up,
Yeah.
but I attend the traditional Latin mass myself.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I go to the Latin mass here in our parish, and we have a diocesan Latin mass that's just amazing. I love it.
Awesome.
But I do the readings from the Novus Ordo for the Novus Ordo because that's where I feel like is the biggest need. Okay. I
Mm-hmm.
feel like 99% of the people that are watching the content or out there, the people I want to reach, most of them are going to Novus Ordo masses. So that's why I do that.
Okay.
But personally, I attend the TLM, 90% of the time. I mean, the other 10% is when I'm traveling, but when I'm home, that's what I do.
And that's a whole nother conversation I would love to have with you sometime about
Sure.
why you have chosen to go that route. So,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
we'll save that for next time because that
Okay.
is a whole nother can of worms. Thank you so much for your time today, and everybody, please go check out Keith's work. He does an amazing job, and as always, God bless all of you.
Thanks, everyone.